Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on getting organized for finals. I'm Betsy Malarsic. I'm a learning skills specialist with the Academic Resource Center at Georgetown University. Feel free throughout the webinar to add any questions to the chat, and there will also be time for questions at the end as well. So to give you a brief overview of the main topics that we'll be touching on during this webinar, we're going to start by talking about 5-day test prep and general test preparation for traditional sit-down exams. If you have 0 tests and all papers, don't despair. We're going to then move into talking about how to develop a writing plan. And then we're going to go into more detail about how to balance multiple assignments, including developing a sample final exam study schedule. So for those of you who are taking tests, either for final exams or also for throughout the semester, these test prep tips that we're going to start with are good guidelines for figuring out how to manage your time. And again, these aren't just for final exams. These suggestions also work for ordinary tests and quizzes, midterms, as they're often called at Georgetown. The main thing to keep in mind is that you should begin your study cycle between 5 and 7 days before your exam. 5 days is a good minimum. If you feel like you have more content, pushing it up to 7 can make sense. Having 7 days also allows you an opportunity to skip days if you have a day that you know it's going to be impossible for you to study during. It just kind of gives you a bit of wiggle room for life happening. Now, the reason that you want to start your test prep cycle so early is because it's more beneficial for you to study for several shorter sessions rather than having fewer, longer sessions. That's because this will test your brain on its ability to recall information. So you've probably heard that cramming for a test is not the best way to do test prep. This is true for many reasons, but one of those reasons is that you're exposing yourself to the information, but you aren't testing yourself on your ability to recall the information. And that sense of recall is just as important to the study process as looking at the information itself. That's how you kind of develop your patterns of understanding the information. So the idea of scheduling your study session starting 5 days before your exam isn't so that you can study for 12 hours a day for 5 days. It's so that you're breaking up that time you might usually use to cram, but spreading it out over a longer period of time. Spreading out your study sessions over several days is also helpful because you process information while you sleep. So it's also super important to prioritize sleep during your study process. Not only will this decrease anxiety when taking a test, because your body will be better taken care of, but it will help you improve information processing that will help you perform better on the exam. If you are someone who struggles to get a good night's sleep, it's not something that's part of your day-to-day life, think of it as a special step that you need to take to do well in test preparation. Getting that full night's sleep for a few days before your exam should be part of your study cycle. So we're going to look at the 5-day test prep recommendation. Again, this isn't a precise science, but if you are unsure how to approach studying for a traditional exam, This is a good guideline for how to break down your process. So the first day in 5-day test prep is just to get organized. What that means is that you're going to look through all of the materials you have available to study from and prioritize which materials and which topics you will focus on. All students have so much available to them. There are class notes, there might be a textbook, there may be recorded lectures, there may be practice problems. And it's not realistic or helpful to say that you're going to review every single page of every single material over the course of 5 days. That's what attending class was for. So to a certain extent, you have to trust yourself that the work you've put in throughout the semester will carry through to finals period. Instead, you need to prioritize what are the topics that you need the most assistance with, and also what are the topics that are most likely to be on the exam, while also thinking about which materials do you find the most helpful. If they're practice problems, is that something that you want to prioritize over reading a textbook chapter again, for example? So in going through all of the material, you will also isolate the problem areas from more familiar material. What I mean by that is you will choose those areas that you need the most assistance with. Now, if you feel like there's a particular class where everything's difficult and you need extreme SOS help with everything, there's still a hierarchy in terms of what the problem areas are. Think of these as the items that you need to spend the most time on because you understand them the least, but they're also the most relevant. And then you're also going to use this first day to determine your study plan for days 2 through 5. So at the end of day 1, you should know what your plan is for the rest of the study test prep cycle. So day 2, your main focus on this day will be to focus on problem areas. So review those concepts and sections that give you the most difficulty. As I mentioned before, this isn't a time to review absolutely everything. Instead, focus on the few areas that are both the most difficult, but also most likely to be included on the exam. And there are a few reasons that you should start with the problem areas. One is that if there's a question or concept you truly don't understand, you still have time to follow up with your professor, a TA, a classmate, or do further research if you continue to have questions. So starting with this gives you that fallback of being able to follow up with someone directly. And that's the other reason why having problem areas focused on early is helpful, is that if it takes you more time than you think it will, then you have time to continue to work on approaching this. Day 3, the goal should be to focus on the easier material. So essentially you want to review the material that you didn't cover on day 2. This is definitely the day that can be the most flexible in terms of breaking it into multiple days. If you feel like you have a lot of content, if this is a fully comprehensive final exam for the whole semester, then maybe you will have 2 days to focus on problem areas and 2 days for easier material. But these are the stages where you're more likely to spend more days or fewer days, depending on how much content you have. So day 4 is intensive review. This is the day when you should study as if the test were the next day. This means that you're reviewing everything, focusing on the problem areas, and doing in-depth second looks at anything that you feel like you really need to because you're not comfortable with it. I recommend this day for students who may have practice tests available. This is a good time to work on those practice tests. If you do that, make sure to leave time to review those test responses in case something comes up that you don't fully understand or that you need to go back and review. And so that leaves day 5. Day 5, you will review all material briefly, but don't try to learn any new material on this day. If you haven't learned it by now, it's probably too late. So trust yourself, trust the study process, and just think of this as a quick review. And then this is also an important day to prioritize getting a good night's sleep and eating well. Make sure you have all of your materials. If it's an online exam, make sure your laptop's charged. That's why day 4 is the intensive review, so that day 5 you can worry about taking care of your body and your physical setting so that you're physically prepared to take the exam. So with the test prep, we're going to get into what that scheduling will look like when you have multiple exams. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the essay writing process. I've referred to this as essay writing tips, but a lot of what I talk about here can also be applied to presentations or working on projects. So think of this as final projects and assignments that don't require studying. So a few starting tips before we break down the process. One is to try to schedule a brainstorming session before you need to start writing. So let's say that your essay is due the last day of finals and you have several finals right before it, but you're probably not going to start writing it till the day before. Make sure that you read the assignment and brainstorm before you get into that busy period. This is going to help you get a sense of what the assignment requires. It's good to deep read the assignment to make sure you don't need to do any particular kinds of research, to double check the page length. And then having an early brainstorming session will also make you check in with whether or not you understand the assignment. If you don't understand it, you want to figure that out sooner rather than later. So even if you don't plan on writing that last essay until 2 days before the end of finals, make sure that you have at least spent 15 minutes thinking about it and looking over the assignment early. That way you'll avoid any unpleasant surprises. Also consider how you can break the stage of writing into smaller units. So consider writing an essay as writing it a section at a time, a page or a time, even a paragraph at a time. Breaking it down in this way will make it easier to plan out the writing process, and it will make it easier to balance multiple assignments at once, as we'll see later during the webinar. When it comes to developing a writing plan, there are several distinct steps. The list I have here isn't the law. This isn't the absolute list of steps for developing a writing plan, but these are some common steps that may apply to assignments that you've worked on in the past. Breaking the assignment down into these little pieces can, as I just mentioned, make it easier to plan out the writing process, which can help you work on several massive assignments throughout a period of a few days. So the steps I have here, one that every assignment has, I would say, including tests, definitely papers, projects, presentations, is reading the assignment. It may seem obvious, but this is the starting point, and I think it's helpful to put it as a separate step because sometimes we procrastinate because we're afraid of the drafting and revising and proofreading. If you think of the first step as reading the assignment, it is an easier way to break that stigma that you may have against the assignment. Brainstorming, I've talked about a little bit already, but this is the idea of seeing how you are engaging with the topic mentally and understanding your own relationship with it. So this is, I think, an important step to do early on, just to make sure you have some sort of stake in the assignment, to see what questions you have, and also to get you thinking subconsciously about what you might do at this assignment. The next 3 steps kind of interact in a few different ways. So I've put them in one order here that may not be true for every assignment. Researching, developing a thesis, and outlining. This is essentially the stage of figuring out what you're going to say before you actually say it. Researching, I happen to have put first here because if it's a very intensive research assignment, you may need to create your thesis and outline based off of what the research is telling you. But sometimes you may have assignments that go the other way around. Maybe you have a thesis already and the research is filling in gaps based off of a thesis that you have a good understanding of. So we'll take a look at a few different breakdowns on the next slide. The next 2 stages also interact with one another in an interesting way, drafting and revising. Drafting is essentially what we call writing the essay. Revising is looking at what you've written, finding its flaws, noticing what works and what doesn't work, and making the argument and the piece as a whole stronger. It's often been said that writing is rewriting, so some folks put more effort into revising than they do into drafting. Proofreading is that final step of just looking over your essay, making sure everything's neat, making sure that you've cited your sources, there are no errors. This can often be a quick step. If it's a research heavy assignment, this might be a much longer assignment if you need to double check all those citations. I often make the mistake of my proofreading session turning into another revising session. So I tend to leave a little bit more time for proofreading because I always want to rewrite something. So we have a few paper writing timelines here. I've made these all 5 days because that tends to be the timeline that we have to work on an assignment during finals period. But of course, with writing, there's no set number of days the way there is with exam preparation. These same steps could happen over 3 weeks, or they could happen over 1 day. Either way, having days to play with and break these steps up throughout makes the task of writing an essay less daunting. So we're going to take a look at 3 quick paper writing timelines, all a little bit different. They do all start with reading the assignment though. For this timeline, at day 1, we have reading the assignment and developing the thesis. So all we're doing that first day is figuring out the main thing that we want to say. We're not even doing a heavy brainstorming session here because we have a clear argument and it's a thesis-driven paper. And once we have that figured out, we have an idea of where we want to go. The second day is going to be going back and forth between researching and outlining. This is an essay where I need that research to create the outline, and these 2 go hand in hand. So this timeline I've written as if I were a writer, which I am, who needs to go back and forth between drafting and revising. So here I'm drafting and revising on day 3 and then drafting and revising on day 4. That's because I know that the revision is going to happen as I'm writing. So this is really a process where I'm planning on developing my ideas as I'm writing the essay. That's why I have less time on brainstorming and outlining and more time on revision, because I'm kind of discovering it as I go. That's also why I have some revising and proofreading on that final day, because I know that my proofreading session will turn into another revising session. So that's one potential timeline. My next potential timeline is a different approach. So with this timeline, I'm really trying to make something happen each day. So day 1, read assignment and brainstorm. Day 2 is outlining and developing that thesis. 3, draft. 4, revise. 5, proofread. So this, I'm really trying to do a step a day. This is a more task-oriented approach. The idea that I brainstorm, thesis, draft, revise, proofread. Having these kind of separate tasks is going to help me stay on track. It gives me clear, concrete goals that I need to accomplish each day. This is also a good timeline for someone who likes to look at the topic with fresh eyes the next day. To a certain extent, breaking an essay writing process across multiple days can really be a tool for some folks if they feel like they can better approach the ideas once they've had some distance from it. So by brainstorming on day 1 and outlining on day 2, that gives those thoughts time to germinate in your mind. And then we have a third potential timeline. Here we're reading the assignment and researching on day 1. This is the kind of assignment that is more research heavy, and the thesis and outline can't happen until after the research happens. So I'm leading with research, and then day 2, I'm going to brainstorm and develop a thesis based on that research. It can't happen until I know what the research says. That leaves me with day 3 to outline and draft, day 4 to draft and revise, ending with, final revisions and proofreading. But what's different about this timeline is really that the research guides the further thought process. Again, these 3 timelines might all be used by the same person for different assignments. There's no right timeline or right order to how these steps work. It really depends on how you work, what your time looks like, and what your process looks like. So we've been building these very ambitious plans for how to approach test prep, essay prep. The next question is, how do we make study sessions be productive? How do we make these plans fit into a busier schedule? 3 times that you should identify for yourself that can really help you create a structured day are, first of all, the time of day when you are most focused. This is going to be very personal for everyone, but when you have a full day, when is it that you get your best work done? And when is it that you feel like you can approach the most difficult task? After that, you want to identify the time of day when you are least focused. What is the time of day that no matter what you're doing, you get tired, you get distracted, and you find that your work goes poorly? You also want to locate sort of the middle between those two, a time of day when you can work on easier tasks. It's not that you can't do any work, but maybe it's not when you're doing your sharpest work. So here I've identified those times for myself. I'm the best focused from 10 a.m. to around noon. It varies from day to day, but this is when I am sharpest. I can really get complicated work done. No matter what day it is or where I am, I'm the least focused from around 2 to 6. I get tired, I'm worn out, and if I am doing work, it goes very, very slowly. Then I tend to get a second wind in the evening. So from 8 to 10, I'm somewhat focused. I'm not as focused as I am in the morning, but I can start working on a task that's a little bit more complicated. So I've identified the peaks and valleys of my day. How does this translate into a study schedule? So this is a hypothetical schedule. We'll be getting into more complicated schedules later in this session, but for me, the task that I would need to use my time of high focus on is paper writing. Paper writing is something where I need to think critically, I need to make decisions, I need to commit to ideas. So for me, I can use that time of peak focus to work on paper writing. For me, studying requires less intentionality. I'm kind of reading and absorbing and reacting. So that's something I can plan on doing in the evening from that 8 to 10 p.m. time. And in the period of low focus, which for me is a unrealistically long time, unfortunately, but if I can name that I'm not going to work there and plan on taking a break, then my day is going to go much better overall. If you know the break is going to happen either way, planning on taking the break and using it for something productive in another way can help you throughout the day as a whole. So with figuring out these peaks and valleys of your day, this is important as we approach the finals and study day period because your days are often unstructured. If you've worked with me before, you may have heard me say that sometimes the least productive days are those long Sundays when you have time to do all the work that you want. Because there's no deadline, no urgency, and no structure, those days somehow slip away from you so easily. There's no structure, so you keep putting off doing the task because you can do it later in the day, and then somehow you're working on it until 2 or 3 in the morning. So part of the goal is to create your own structure for unstructured days based off of your productivity levels. So once you've figured out those times of peak productivity and low productivity, you want to figure out a regular time for you to start studying each day and then a regular bedtime over this study period. Having that structure is going to ensure that you're getting sufficient rest, which will help you with the test prep. It'll just help you work better, but it will add structure that keeps you from procrastinating as well. So here's a potential daily study day schedule. Again, this is sort of based off of a fantasy world where I have a lot of time to take a break in the middle of the day, but here's what, for me, a productive break day would look like. I would wake up and eat breakfast around 9. Then I would look over my to-do list for the day. I'll talk more about this later, but looking over your to-do list can help you stay on track with a study schedule. Then from 10 until lunchtime at 1:30, I'm going to work on paper writing. Then I move into this break period where I know my energy is low and I don't want to be unproductive. So what I do is I eat lunch, I exercise, I shower, I do chores. This might be when I do laundry. This might be when I go to the grocery store. I don't let myself relax for a break until 5:30 and only then for an hour. That's because I know that relaxation period is a gateway into extreme procrastination for me. So I wait until I've done all these other productive break activities before I let myself relax. And I also relax before a structured activity, which is dinner. Dinner is going to happen at a set time, aka when the dining halls are open and when I'm getting hungry. So dinner is going to be a helpful bridge between that relaxation period and getting back into working. Likewise, I have a bridge between dinner and studying, which is organizing my study materials. I find it difficult to jump right from a break into extreme productivity. So I often have as my first thing before a study block, looking over my to-do list, looking over my plan. Then I'm studying until 11, then I'm getting ready for bed, and then bedtime at around 11:30, 12. So my schedule might vary from day to day, but if I can stick with the 9 a.m. wake up and 11:30 or 12 bedtime, that's going to create the structure that allows me to get a lot of sleep. I also try to, throughout the day, create regularity in meal times as well to make these structured study blocks. Now, this is based off of my peak productivity. There's no right or wrong in terms of what the times are. Maybe you're going to wake up at 5 a.m. and go to bed at 10 p.m. Maybe you're going to wake up at 2 p.m. and go to bed at 4 a.m. It's based on when you are working best so that you can use your time productively. So when you're turning these paper and test plans into more productive schedules, there are a few tips I wanted to mention. One is to break each day into 2 to 3 different subjects or tasks. So this may be several different subjects if you have a lot of exams falling over the same period of time. However, you may just have 1 or 2 days where you're focusing on one subject. If that's the case, still try to break your day into separate tasks, such as essay brainstorming in the morning, outlining in the afternoon. Having these tasks will give you that sense of structure and will help keep you on task, which will keep you from procrastinating. If you have told yourself you are going to brainstorm in the morning and then afternoon comes and you didn't brainstorm, that helps you check in with how your process is going and it helps you stay focused. Related to that, stick to the end time you set for each study block. Often we have this instinct when we're being unproductive to sit in the same place until the task gets done. But if you scheduled 2 hours for brainstorming and you didn't brainstorm, it's unlikely that it's going to happen in that 3rd hour. Instead, end your study block when you said you would, walk away, do something else. That way you'll at least stay on task with your other subjects, and maybe you'll do better when you reapproach it later with a fresh mind. So despite the best intentions, sometimes the study plans can go awry. That's why it's important to update your study plan each day. I mentioned showing my schedule just now that I like to check in with my study plan at the beginning of each study block because it's easier to start the study process that way for me. But just make sure that you're checking in with your study plan and updating it because most study plans get messed up in some way or another. Related to that, be sure to leave the time directly before each deadline open, just in case, especially if you're a deadline worker. If you have an essay due at midnight and you're planning on finishing it 3 days beforehand, maybe still leave that evening open, just in case. Staying on task can also be more challenging than we would like it to be. So I have a few quick tips to help you stay focused during these long study blocks. I would recommend identifying your top distraction or top 2 distractions and eliminating it temporarily. This isn't forever, it's just for a week or 2 until finals are over. So think about that one website, that one app that you always find yourself going to when you shouldn't be. If it's an app, delete it. If it's a website, maybe log out of it. log out of your account, and then potentially block it on your laptop. Again, this isn't forever, it's just for a few weeks. Perhaps your distraction is a person. It happens. If that's the case, consider turning off your phone while you're studying or finding different locations to study. You may have to get creative when people come into play, but think about how you can create that separation between you and that distraction for a very short temporary period of time. Now, I mentioned just identifying your top distraction, maybe your top two. That's because we're still human, we're tired, you're pushing yourselves, procrastination happens. A better way to approach procrastination is to intentionally select an activity to procrastinate with that will either bore you sooner rather than later, or is at least finite. I describe infinite procrastination activities as something that it's so easy to say just one more video, one more game. The ultimate in this, I think, is TikTok, where it just keeps going and going and going. Choose for yourself an activity that you can engage with for a little bit. It will be interesting enough for you to feel like you're taking a break when you don't feel like working, but it will be easy for you to push away so that you can return to your work. I was talking with a student this week and we talked about her maybe printing out a Sudoku while she was working on an essay. This is something that it's interesting, but it has a finite point. We also talked about her printing it out because then it's in a different physical medium than the essay. She's not closing out of the essay to work on the puzzle. She's just turning her head and then the essay's still there. So maybe it'll be easy for her to turn back. With this in mind, if you notice that you aren't working for long periods of time, step away and do something else. Sometimes it's better to shake yourself out of that procrastination space by trying to do something physical around your apartment. Try packing, try doing the dishes, do something different for a little bit. And then if you're able to, when you come back to a workspace, maybe jump to another subject for a little bit. I also find it can be helpful to handwrite a to-do list of tangible tasks that you need to complete within your larger task. So if you find you're not staying on task, you have an essay to write and you're just staring at it and you don't want to do it, grab a Post-it note and a pen and write out bullet points of the next 5 things you need to do. It might be as easy as step 1, outline next paragraph. Step 2, find quote for paragraph. Step 3, write bullets for paragraph. Just very easy to do steps. And then you just have to focus on that first step, then the next step, then the next step. As you complete each step, cross it off. And crossing off that item on your to-do list is going to give you those positive endorphins in your brain and just that sense of accomplishment of doing one small piece of progress is going to help build that momentum to push you forward. We've talked about these elaborate plans for tests, for papers. So now we're going to move into balancing multiple finals. The basic overview that I'm going to illustrate this in more detail, but the basic steps to follow is, first of all, write all of your deadlines in one place. This may seem obvious, but it's so important. Probably the most important thing from this whole session is just look at all of your deadlines in one place and see how they fall and how that affects your study time. A lot of folks have their deadlines on their Canvas pages, some are on Google Calendar, some aren't, some are in syllabi. Choose a planner or an app or an Excel spreadsheet and just write them all down to see what they look like next to one another. Then you want to set your test prep schedules. Start by setting your 5 to 7 day test prep study cycles before you figure out your paper writing plans, because the test dates are set. Your paper deadlines are also set, but a paper, there's more flexibility in how you work on it related to the deadline. You can write a paper 2 weeks before it's due and turn it in, and the paper can still be great. If you study for a test 2 weeks before the test and then don't think about it for 2 weeks, that's more challenging. So start by setting those study cycles. Then after that, fill in your paper, project, presentation plans after you see what your test schedules look like. So I'm going to show you a potential study plan for 5 finals where I don't have a lot of other commitments going on. It should be noted if you have other commitments, you should put those in your calendar first, especially if they're non-negotiable, such as a job, childcare, something that's happening no matter what. For my finals period, I have 4 courses where the finals happen to be due 5 days in a row. I have a history research paper due the 9th, a Spanish exam the 10th, a computer science exam the 11th, a theology paper due the 12th, and a women and gender study paper due the 13th. So the good thing about this schedule is I get my study days to study, but the bad thing is I have these deadlines back to back to back to back to back. So here's what they all look like on a calendar. In case you are curious, for both of these lists, I'm using Excel sheet templates, but I am putting these up here visually so I can see what they look like. Luckily, they're all in the afternoon, so that's going to allow me to stick to a similar sleep schedule each day, but having them back to back is challenging. So first, I'm going to put in my Spanish and computer science study plans, which I will color code to match the colors I have here. So looks like a lot. The Spanish here, my whole cycle is in pink, and the computer science is in purple. So I've decided that I want to set a regular study time for each exam. The exams fall a day apart, so I can't study for one and then the other. I have to study for them simultaneously. Since my period of lowest energy that I'm working is this 3 to 6 p.m. period, I've decided to make that computer science time because I have a lot of practice problems I can do for that. That's more practical, and that's something that I can engage with more easily. Spanish, it's a lot of flashcards for me, reading, review, so that feels like something I'll be more comfortable with in the evening. So Thursday, one of my reading days, I'm doing study day 1 for computer science, looking over materials, developing a plan. Same for Spanish in the evening. Then on Friday, the next day, problem areas for both. The 3rd day, I'm doing review for both. And then Sunday, which is the day when I'm supposed to study the most difficult content, also happens to be the day before my history final is due. So what I've decided is I'm going to do my computer science practice test on this day and begin reviewing it. And then I'm going to finish reviewing the practice test after the history final is due. The history final due date falls during my usual computer science study time, but I want to leave that morning free in case something comes up with the paper. And then Spanish, I can continue with the problem areas in the evening and review. Now I have the Spanish final Tuesday at 4 p.m. So I'm going to do some light review that morning, but that's not the 5th day in my study cycle. This is just additional review. Really, I want to make sure I leave time to think about Spanish, but I also want to leave time for lunch, for getting ready and making sure I'm well rested and well taken care of so that I can be my best self going into the Spanish final. Then that evening, doing computer science review for the final the next day. So I've come up with my final study plans. Now it's time to somehow add paper plans into this mix. So I mentioned earlier that it's important to make sure you look at the prompt and do brainstorming early for all assignments, just to make sure there are no problems, make sure you understand it, and to get your brain moving. So with that in mind, I'm using my first study day to make sure I, at a minimum, read all the prompts and brainstorm. The history final is due first. It's time to start working on it, and that's a research paper, so it's challenging. So that's becoming my 10 a.m. high focus assignment, reading the prompt, brainstorming, research outline. The theology, which is in the blue, is my next deadline, and I know that I'm not going to be able to wait until after these finals to start working on it. So I want to do a similar approach for this. Read the prompt, brainstorm, look through sources, outline. For the women and gender study essay, which is in the green, this I know I'm probably not going to be working on until the end of the week. So here I'm just reading the prompt and brainstorming just to make sure I know what's going on with the assignment. So I've saved this 10 to 2 morning period for writing because that's my high focus and that's when I need to work on it. I've decided to alternate working on the history and theology essays because I'm worried that if I try to finish the history essay first, it will take so long that I will put off starting the theology essay until it's too late. So that's why I've chosen to alternate. The goal is to get the draft done on Thursday, and hypothetically, I'd love to have the history essay done on my second writing day of Saturday, but I know myself and it might not happen. So I've left the whole morning before it's due open just in case. For the theology essay, I'm hoping to have it done before the history paper is even due, but I know that might not happen. So when I'm looking at my last few days, the theology, which again is in the blue, I've added a long proofreading block to the evening before the essays due. Again, I'm hoping it'll be done by now, but if not, I know I have this evening to work on it and I'm not scheduling anything for the next morning. So it's kind of my buffer zone. Meanwhile, I also have scheduled working on my final essay for women and gender studies for after my final exam for computer science. I have myself rereading the prompt and brainstorming again because it's been a while, and then trying to develop a thesis and outline. Now I'm doing this before working on my theology essay because I'm worried if I work on the theology essay first, that deadline will make me work only on that, and then I won't get any progress done on the women and gender study essay. So very intense study schedule. I, to a certain extent, think I've overplanned for studying and maybe underplanned for paper writing just based on my personal habits. So that's why every day I'll check in to see how I'm doing. But you'll also notice that I have a very similar start and end time, 10 a.m., 10 p.m., and sticking to that's going to be really important. So we've covered a lot of material during this session, maybe a little bit overwhelming. So I wanted to end with an exam prep checklist, 5 things that you should do when you're sitting down to plan for your upcoming exams. The first one, which I mentioned was probably the most important thing you can do, is write all of your deadlines in one place. You may have even still some final papers, midterm type assignments. So you can write everything down, but just make sure it's all in one place so you can see how those deadlines fall in relationship to one another. The second thing you should do is assess your daily points of high and low focus. When is that time that you absolutely should be studying every day? And when is that time when you're probably going to be procrastinating? And how can you plan on taking a break during that time? The third thing you should do is decide which tasks require high versus low focus. Out of all the things you have to do, what should you try to schedule around those times when you really have peak focus? After that, schedule 5-day test prep for each of your exams. And once you've scheduled that, go back and schedule your paper or project task blocks around those test prep blocks. So we'll have time for questions in a moment. I did want to mention, however, we have one more webinar this semester, which is actually going to be a final exam co-working session next Monday from 4 to 5 p.m. It will be the same Zoom link that you found on the ARC website or that was emailed to you today. So it's going to be very low-key, mainly an opportunity for you to start working on final exam material. If you need a little bit of external accountability, come join us. We'll have a few study tips and a lot of time to sit and work. So if you have any questions, please add them to the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time today and best of luck as you're preparing for your final exams.